If a tree falls in a forest and there's no one around to hear it, does it make a sound? Our instinct is to say, yes, of course. The tree collapses, the branches snap, and it hits the ground. All of these should make a sound. Well, relativity teaches us that the sound an observer would experience is relative to their position. So, if there's no eardrum, there is no sound. Quantum physics tells us that the very act of observing something can change its state. So if we really want to know if reality is separate from the observer, then we need to know if there is an objective reality. There are widely different interpretations of reality. In philosophy, reality is often defined as the state of things as they are, rather than as they are imagined or perceived. Scientifically, reality includes the physical world and all of the information it emits, information our brains then interpret into conscious experience. Now, the concept of whether reality is separate from the observer is a topic of significant debate in both philosophy and physics. According to modern physicalism, physical and external reality exists prior to consciousness, and the world is mind-dependent. This idea is supported by scientific realism, which asserts that the world investigated by science exists independently of our perception, which leads to us discovering reality. However, quantum mechanics and relativity challenge the notion of objective reality. Quantum mechanics shows us that observation can influence the state of a system, suggesting that at a fundamental level, the act of observation is inseparable from what is observed. The observer effect in quantum mechanics demonstrates that the act of measurement can alter the system being observed, leading to the conclusion that reality might be observer dependent. So we've looked at whether the world exists independently of our observation, but what about how our minds interpret it? Neuroscience tells us something profound. We never perceive reality directly. Instead, our brains are constantly interpreting sensory information, filling in the gaps, and constructing a version of reality that is useful but not necessarily completely accurate. For example, the image that you're seeing right now is upside down when it hits your retina, and your brain then flips it automatically and you never notice. That's just one of the countless adjustments that your brain makes without you realizing. In other words, what we experience as reality is always filtered. It's not a direct feed from the universe, it's a reconstructed model tailored to our biology. This doesn't mean reality isn't real, but it does mean our version of it is always a little subjective. Now let's pause for a moment and ask, what is it that we are actually seeing and feeling? Is it the world itself, or is it our brain's internal rendering of light, sound, and sensation? See, color isn't just out there in the world. It's how our brains translate wavelengths of light, and in some cases, our brains just completely make things up, like the color purple, for example. Sound is just pressure waves converted by the eardrum and interpreted by your brain into music, noise, or silence. These ideas pit realism against idealism and forces us to confront the very foundations of what we call reality. We often think of perception as something that is passive. We open our eyes and we just see. We touch something and we just feel, but that's not quite what's happening. Perception isn't passive, it's an active process of construction. What we experience is shaped by memory, context, and emotion, not just the sensory data. We don't see the world as it is, but more as we are. In philosophy, two schools of thought take center stage here. Realism says that the world exists independently of us. The rock is still there, the sun still burns, and the tree falls, whether or not anyone is there to see it. Idealism challenges this. What we call reality may be constructed, or at least shaped by the mind. We never access the world directly, only our model of it. As Kant put it, we can't know the thing itself, only how it appears to us. Two people can view the same scene and have an entirely different experience, filtered through memories, emotions, and their perspective. Every observer alters what is observed. In this way, there is no neutral observer because every act of observation reshapes reality and the observer. Science seeks objectivity through measurement, instrument, and repeatability. Yet even here, the observer matters. In quantum mechanics, observation collapses a cloud of possibilities into a specific state. So if perception is not reality, and if every observer experiences the world differently, then it stands to reason that the truth is not singular. Now, this doesn't mean that anything goes or that we can't know anything, but it means that we must hold our truths lightly. It means being open to other perspectives, recognizing that our understanding of something may not always be clear, and letting go of the illusion that our view is the view. In this way, idealism doesn't just challenge the nature of reality, it invites us into greater empathy, humility, and openness. So, is reality separate from the observer? This philosophical lens suggests no, not entirely. What we experience is always shaped by perception. Our minds do not mirror the world, they build it. And maybe recognizing that is the first step towards seeing the world more clearly. But there may be something that we are not quite considering here. We usually think of ourselves as separate from the world, observers watching from the outside. But what if that's not quite true? The observer-observation duality flips this idea. It sees observation not as a passive act, but a process, one that constructs both the observer and the observed together. Similar to what we discussed earlier in quantum mechanics, where particles don't take on a definitive state until they're observed. A particle isn't just here or there until you check on it. The act of checking, of observing, collapses possibilities into actuality. But the OOD takes this one step further. The observer is not just influencing reality, the observer is shaped by the very act of observing. It borrows this idea from epistemology, the study of knowledge, where all knowledge is shaped by the context and the structure of the knower. So you can't remove the observer from the equation, because the act of knowing is part of the system. One of the most profound implications of the OOD model is that the observer and the world are not separate entities. They emerge together in real time through an ongoing process of interaction. This reframes consciousness not as something trapped in the brain, but as a relational event, a phenomenon that arises between the perceiver and what is perceived. Just as a dance requires both dancer and movement, reality requires both the observer and observation. In traditional models, the observer is a person, a brain, a self. But the OOD challenges this too. It suggests that the observer is not a fixed identity. It is a pattern of activity, a structure that emerges from relational processes. You're not a fixed self watching the world go by, you're a process, a pattern of interaction. So this process-based approach suggests that reality is not pre-formed but co-constructed. There is no independent, objective world apart from the observer, and no pure observer separate from the world. Every act of perception is a creative event that redefines both the knower and what is known. This doesn't mean that the universe is an illusion, it means that reality is participatory. This idea reorients science, reminding us that measurement is never neutral. It reorients philosophy, showing that being and knowing can be intertwined, and consciousness, proposing that awareness is not in here, but between the knower and the known. It invites us to see reality not as a stage set before us, but as a dance that we are already a part of. It suggests that the universe is not complete without an observer, and that the observer is not real without a universe to observe. In other words, reality is not something that you look at, it is something that we co-create. Now, while I find the observer-observation duality deeply fascinating, the idea that reality is not fixed but emerges through interaction, that both the observer and the observed are part of a dynamic, co-creative process challenges much of what I take for granted. And perhaps as I continue to expand my understanding through more reading, research and reflection, I may find my perspective shifting more towards this view. But for now, as this is a very new idea to me, I find myself still leaning towards realism and physicalism. To me, there's something intuitively compelling about the idea that the universe exists independently of whether I observe it. After all, I wouldn't be here conscious and curious if stars hadn't already burned and planets hadn't already formed long before I ever opened my eyes. To suggest that none of this is real until observed feels, at least for now, a little too centered on the human experience. That said, the line between observer and reality may not be as clear-cut as we once believed. Even if reality does exist independent of us, our experience of it and our little slice of the cosmos is undeniably shaped by perception, perspective, and context. And through that, our ability to see and experience the wonders of existence. Well, thank you for joining me at the start of what I hope will be a long and adventurous journey. I hope you found this video thought-provoking because someone has to, and it may as well be you. And until next time, remember this: one day we will all be stardust. So until then, you may as well subscribe.